Let's see if I can ramble through the typical problems and how you fix them with a Data East power supply. This one is for a DMD game, and you can see right away it's got some fuse clip problems. But the other typical problems on Data East power supplies is the general illumination header burns almost 100% of the time. Strangely, this particular one is not too bad. And then I always replace the 15-pin power output header. This provides the plus 12, minus 12, 5, and ground to the rest of the boards in the system. Capacitor C2 leaks frequently and then corrodes this trace that leads to these dual 1N 4004 diodes. And then you have no 5 volts after that. This capacitor also leaks. This is a 47 microfarad 63 volt cap. And then there's a 330 microfarad cap at C7 that leaks frequently also. I don't know why these caps leak. Maybe it was the part selection when Data East was doing the manufacturing. But the Williams System 11 power supply is nearly identical, and the caps on that power supply never leak. So preventive maintenance on Data East power supplies, I think it's good to replace C2, C3, and C7. These ganged 4700 microfarad caps are almost never a problem on a Data East power supply, and these two 200 volt, 220 microfarads, these are in the high voltage section, and on a WPC audio visual board, for instance, sometimes the equivalent caps can fail and cause some rolling in the displays. I've never seen these caps fail. Of course, the high voltage section's got its typical issues. But here's one that we're working on today. Now, I've replaced some of these fuse clips, or a lot of these fuse clips. You can see I've got a bunch of bits of them right here. And this is a pair that I've replaced. I always replace them in pairs so you can ensure that you get the geometry correct. And once one side of the fuse clip fails, the other side's going to fail also. You can see this one's very loose. They'll just crack right off if you wiggle it around a little bit. So here's my nice pile of fuse clips parts. And so fuse clips are kind of inexpensive, but on this particular board, they're a pain in the rear end to replace if you try to remove the old fuse clip. And the reason for that is there are through holes that the clip goes through, and Data East, for whatever reason, twisted that clip on the other side, which makes it very difficult to remove. Plus, there's a solder pad underneath each of these that this thing is welded to. So if you try to remove this old fuse clip base, you're almost certainly going to damage the board. I found it much better to take a fuse clip and just cut the through hole part of it off, and then you sort of weld it to, or tack solder it to, the existing, or the part that's left over. And we do this by using an old fuse, or even the fuse that was in there, and we put that in there. We make sure it's all squared up, and then we position it. And again, this, you want to do both of these at the same time, so you make sure you get the geometry correct. And then you just tack solder one side of the fuse clip down. The outside one, obviously, you can't reach the inside. And I don't have my fan blowing here to blow all that vapor away. So I've got that side tacked down. Well, I picked the worst one to do, didn't I? Huh, maybe I can reach under here. Alexa, turn on big fan. I'm going to hold that down for just a second. There, the solder just flowed. So I'm just going to let that cool. Once both sides have cooled, I'm gently going to remove the fuse that was in there. Set it aside for a second. Get my better glasses on. And then we're going to tack down the other side. And you just need an iron that can deliver enough heat to overcome the heat mass. You try to do it without moving the fuse clip, at least too much. I almost accomplished that. I really did pick the worst one to do. I really did. So let's get this bad boy back on there. Get it oriented correctly. Start melting solder again. So I'm still, at this point, I'm a little worried about the geometry, so I'm going to melt this solder down pretty good, and then I'm going to put this fuse in while the solder's still molten, and that'll guarantee that we've got the right geometries. So that's how I do it. It's much easier, it's reliable, and it doesn't damage the PCB. Thanks for tuning in. Today we have a Last Action Hero MPU on the bench. I've just put the finishing touches on alkaline corrosion abatement. And the corrosion, you can see where it stretched, but it hit into this cap, into this area too, and it killed the 6802 processor. So I have removed, and it killed the crystal. I removed a bunch of parts, sanded to bare copper, conformal coated, replaced parts, rebuilt traces, the whole kit and caboodle. And I just for a note, the original board has two 1N5817 diodes at this location. If you install NVRAM, as I have done here, you can simply replace the right-hand one with a 0-ohm jumper or a wire jumper, as they are sometimes called. So I've installed NVRAM. I had a problem when I was testing for the first time, and some of the solenoids weren't firing. And the reason they weren't firing was because of the corrosion that you can see on these two header pins, or two headers. So I've replaced these two headers. Oddly enough, the transistors that drive the grounds for the coils at those headers were unimpacted by the corrosion, but the client is going to need to repin the female side of those two connectors. So I have a Simpsons ROM in it. And away we go. I do have a Simpsons era soundboard attached also, so I can run through the sounds. And this just makes sure that the MPU is commanding. The right sounds. The sounds are commanded through this ribbon cable, and generally they aren't impacted by corrosion, but I like to make sure Here we have it in display test, and that's working just fine. Switch test, oops, sorry. I'm going to walk through, just like this, the diagonal of the switch matrix. Since The Simpsons uses all 64 switches, this is a nice quick way to test all the rows and all the columns at the same time. Lamp test. Let's take some light off this. Looking good. Data East allows you to test each row individually and each column individually, and in fact each individual lamp. Now you'll see a little ghosting here. That is because this 8x8 LED matrix is an LED matrix. Flash lamps. And the red ones are all blinking because the C side on this Data East game is all flashers, and then it's running through some of them that are not multiplexed. So right here, those 2, 3, and 4 were not operating correctly, and it was just a matter of corrosion on the headers. Of course, I chased my tail and got the logic probe out and made sure that the 7408 was delivering the correct signal, and it was. It's always a treat walking through the Data East schematics. These are the special solenoids that are firing right now, and the 2 orange ones are the flipper power enable. So let me manually fire the special solenoids just as they would be in a game. They switch. Skip that part, and this MPU is good to go. I've finished the power supply, and it has tested perfectly also. It had some leaky caps at C2, C3, and C7, and I made a video about replacing fuse clips with your power supply. So once I get the PPB board tested, we are good to go. Thank you very much. Back on the bench with the PPB board from this Jurassic Park, I think it was. You can see we've got more corrosion on connector J6, so the client is going to need to repin that connector also, and you can see we have some additional fuse clip issues. These are the GI fuses. The GI header on this one's not too bad, but I'm going to replace it anyway. Typically this header burns. It's got GIN comes in over here, and it goes right back out after going through a fuse. Typically pin 1 burns, or the trace underneath there burns. But let's fix that up. Corrosion is out there. It can't be reasoned with. It can't be bargained with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop, ever, until the board is dead.